Recently I've been doing some experiments that happen to involve the use of sulfuric acid. It turned out that the European Union have made sulfuric acid very difficult to buy. The reason seems to be that people have a tendency to throw it at each other. Surely no normal person who isn't a sociopath can really comprehend this. But that's apparently the situation we have to live with. I was able to obtain some drain cleaner which is based on sulfuric acid, albeit dilute. Now this drain cleaner happens to contain organic chemicals, the aim of which is to prevent the sulfuric acid corroding pipes. I wondered if I could purify the acid by adding hydrogen peroxide to it. Before attempting this, I turned to the internet to see what the internet has to say about it. It was from the YouTube chemist Nile Red that I learned that sulfuric acid combined with hydrogen peroxide is known as piranha solution. It's used for cleaning laboratory glassware. It's called piranha solution because it will dissolve just about anything. It eats whatever is put into it. Nile Red has a video where he hangs a chicken drumstick, the leg of a chicken, in some piranha solution. And interestingly, the piranha solution completely dissolves the leg, including the bone. Nile Red is a very enthusiastic young man who seems to enjoy making cancer-causing fuming toxic substances for amusement, and yet even he seems to be rather scared of piranha solution, and with good reason. This has set me wondering why piranha solution doesn't feature in more stories about people attempting to dissolve bodies. It's clearly capable of doing the job. On the other hand, anyone trying to manufacture a large quantity of piranha solution would almost certainly injure themselves severely. Not only does the substance burn through clothes, but it is liable to react violently with certain kinds of fabric. Even so, I think perhaps a qualified chemist, someone who thoroughly understood the risks involved in handling piranha solution, might perhaps attempt to use it to make a body disappear, especially if they weren't quite right in the head to start with, which probably most murderers aren't. In the story that follows, my protagonist is a chemist and he tries exactly that. The results are not quite what he expected. "Do you really have to see him?" said Mrs. Amelia Calhoun, thumbing through the pages of a fashion magazine. "He gives me the creeps." "Half an hour," said Mr. Christopher Calhoun. "An hour at the most. Purely business. I've put it off far too long already." "To think I might have married him if I hadn't met you," said Amelia, shuddering involuntarily. "I think I would have killed myself by now." "That's a bit drastic, isn't it?" said Christopher. "There's always divorce." "True," said Amelia. "You know, I just can't believe how he's changed." "Drugs can do that to a person," said Christopher. "I've tried to talk to him about it, but he won't listen to me. But then, if he hadn't gone weird, we probably wouldn't be together now, so it all works for the best." Amelia snorted in laughter. "Poor Felix," she said. "Anyway," said Christopher, "are you going to be in when I get back?" "No, I have lunch arranged with the Queen," said Amelia. "I might pop to the shop and get some more eggs as well." "Well, I'll be back in about an hour and a half," said Christopher. He bent down to kiss her. "Say hello to Her Majesty for me." On the other side of town, Felix Schelling sat in a rocking chair in his living room with a satisfied expression on his face. He was about to execute the perfect murder. On his lap was a clipboard bearing several sheets of letter paper covered in writing. He added a dot to the end of the last sentence, slamming the point of the pen into the paper with an air of finality, and chuckled to himself. After sealing the papers in an envelope, he placed it in amongst his other papers and sat down in the chair again. Now it was time for a pre-murder binge. He poured a glass of ice water from a carafe, sitting on a little wooden table by the side of his chair, and rinsed his mouth with it. Then, taking the vial of ether, he dropped 20 drops onto his tongue, counting them one by one. Then he quickly washed it down his throat with more water. The familiar effects came on quickly. The euphoria, the giddiness, the tension leaving his muscles, and then the curious alteration in his perception of space, which he had only begun to notice 2 months earlier. Perhaps a sign of brain damage, he thought, idly. Then a flood of anger washed over him. That fool Christopher was going to get what was coming to him. He, Felix, alone had invented sparrow paint, and how had Christopher repaid him? By stealing his fiancée. No one more richly deserved his fate than Christopher Calhoun. A tiny whisper at the back of his mind suggested that perhaps this wasn't entirely true, that perhaps he had merely been a hired chemist, and perhaps he himself had sabotaged his relationship with Amelia, but by now his prolonged ether habit had almost completely silenced the voice of reason. Besides, he said out loud to himself, slurring his words, history is written by the victors. After his death, perhaps in 50 or 60 years, a letter would be found in his belongings. Then the world would marvel at his genius. Of course, the police might suspect him, but they would never be able to prove anything. Christopher Calhoun was about to vanish, more completely than anyone had ever vanished before. He decided to consume another 10 drops of ether. It was always necessary to increase the dose. His tolerance by now was phenomenal. A second wave of euphoria washed over him, and he lay back and closed his eyes. He could exactly picture his letter being read. The sounds and images seemed as vivid in his brain as though they had actually happened already. Afterwards he would have no doubt that he had seen a true vision of the future, such as only a man of profound intellect at the very height of an ether binge and in the middle of a deep ether addiction could hope to see. It was found among his belongings, said a fresh-faced young policeman. He killed his business partner, Sarge. I checked. Calhoun went missing half a century ago. What is it? Said the grizzled older police detective, stroking his beard distractedly, half his mind still on the contents of the computer screen in front of him. It's a confession, a full confession. Half a century ago, said the detective. Bit late. I've got enough to do without investigating crimes that happened half a century ago. I'll leave it here, shall I? Said the young constable. You do that, said the detective. Detective Willits didn't open the letter till lunchtime. He had intended to eat lunch while reading it, but once he began reading, the letter commanded his full attention. The letter was dated January the 14th, 2018. To whom it may concern, I, Felix Schelling, murdered Christopher Calhoun. He claimed half the credit for work that was really mine, and he stole my woman. By murdering him, I merely served justice upon an evil man. Only a person of great genius could have invented sparrow paint, the now ubiquitous lacquer that waterproofs and seals all surfaces with a clear, quick-drying varnish, and I applied my genius in full to the problem of disposing of Calhoun. It may be that in your time, other, even more perfect varnishes have been discovered, perhaps by hyper-intelligent computers, but in my time, sparrow paint represented the highest possible achievement of the human mind, and only I deserve the profits from it. Calhoun, needless to say, claimed that the initial idea was his, and that it would never have caught on without his clever marketing. His is the mind of a mediocre parasite that attaches itself to true genius and feeds off it, leaving nothing behind but an empty husk, or so was his intention. But Christopher's wicked impudence was brought to a sudden halt by the ruthless sword of justice, wielded by myself. I began by asking myself how a body could be made to disappear completely. Lesser minds would have gravitated towards burial in some forest or at sea, but then a grave must be dug or a boat prepared, and the opportunity for witnesses to interfere with the wheels of justice are legion. As a chemist, I saw immediately that Calhoun simply needed to be chemically rearranged, and then he could be conveniently flushed down the drain and no one would ever be the wiser. I decided to use piranha solution as the medium of dissolution of Christopher's person. Only chemists know about it. It is used for cleaning glassware when all else fails. The solution consists of a mixture of sulfuric acid and hydrogen peroxide. When concentrated, piranha solution may react violently with certain items of clothing, and I have therefore calculated an optimal concentration that may be used quite safely by a man of my skill. Over the previous year, I quietly visited chemists and hardware shops in order to gradually procure the requisite quantities of acid and peroxide. I paid in cash to ensure my purchases were untraceable. I then transferred the liquids to plastic containers. I also synthesized a quantity of barbiturates, again using household substances purchased with cash. After performing the synthesis, I disposed of all equipment used in case the police should search my house. The electric chair forms the final part of my masterwork. It's not an electric chair in the traditional sense. Rather, it's a modified electric wheelchair, which I have ostensibly been working on in order to help those who have found themselves unable to walk. Thus, a piece of apparatus key to my plan will appear to the police as evidence of my fundamentally moral character. I have modified the chair so that when a person sits on it, it can pitch him violently forward without warning upon receiving a certain radio signal. This functionality is implemented via a charge of sodium azide, which is electrically activated. After discharge, the chair will return to its usual configuration, arousing no suspicion. I shall invite Christopher to my house, claiming I wish to discuss the terms under which we license Sparrow paint. I will invite him to try out my new and improved electric wheelchair design. While he is sitting in the chair, I will offer him a drink of his favourite wine. While pouring his glass, a device concealed in my sleeve will drip barbital into it. I have spent over 20 hours practicing this in front of a mirror, and I am certain he will detect nothing. When the drug begins to take effect, I will wheel him into the bathroom, and I will place the wheelchair facing the bath. Here is perhaps the most ingenious part of my plan. The bath is varnished with Sparrow paint, rendering it impervious to the piranha solution with which I have carefully filled it. When I press the light switch 3 times, the explosive charge under the seat of the wheelchair will detonate, throwing Christopher against the bathroom wall, from where he will fall into the bath. I will take the wheelchair and put it back in the living room. I will then put on Christopher's hat, shoes, sunglasses and jacket. My security camera will appear to show Christopher leaving my house. Christopher always keeps his car keys in the pocket of his jacket. I will walk outside to his car, and I will drive his car and park it at the end of a lane near the forest. I will then remove Christopher's clothes except for his shoes, and I will walk back to my house in my own clothes. I will stop only to change into my own shoes while throwing his shoes in the river. This will ensure that if any footprints can be traced at all near the car, they will appear to be Christopher's footprints and not mine. After slipping quietly into my house via the backyard, I will then leave again via the front, again ensuring I am recorded on the security camera. I will then proceed to the Lion, where I will be sure to tell the staff that I have just concluded an excellent deal with my business partner and wish to have a celebratory beverage. While I am drinking, Christopher's body will be dissolving. Even his clothes and the ring on his finger will dissolve in the piranha solution. After an hour, he will have transformed completely from his customary solid state to the liquid state, and the carefully designed bath plug will finally give way, draining the liquid. I have programmed the showerhead to then turn on and automatically cleanse the bath of any remaining traces. The shower will spray a solution of sodium carbonate over the entire area, neutralizing any remaining acid, and any liquid on the floor will trickle into the drains at the edge of the bath area. My bathroom is of the wet room style, allowing for easy cleaning and drainage. It will appear to the whole world as though, after leaving my house alone, Christopher drove his car to the forest and went for a walk, never to be seen again. Perhaps he got lost in the forest. I will, of course, tell Amelia and the police that Christopher spoke of intending to take a walk to clear his mind. I may well clean the sparrow paint off the bath with a little acetone later on, but I hardly think the police will regard a varnished bath as suspicious in any case. To all intents and purposes, Christopher will have simply vanished completely after leaving my house. The police can search my house if they feel like it. They won't find anything incriminating. I dare say Amelia may turn to me for consolation in her sorrow. As the effect of the ether subsided, the vision receded and Felix opened his eyes. If I can see it, then I can do it, he said to himself, chuckling quietly. As Christopher Calhoun drove to Felix's house, his mind was mainly on the topic of his garden, where he was growing a selection of herbs and vegetables. The weather was turning cold and it was probably time to harvest the potatoes, he thought. The car heater was turned on, and flocks of birds were circling in the sky, preparing to migrate for the winter. Christopher was a happy and contented man, in a good mood. By the time Chris rang the doorbell, the ether had worn off Felix completely. Felix greeted him enthusiastically, making sure to do so in the doorway itself, where the security camera would capture it. "You seem in good spirits for once, Felix," said Christopher. "I haven't seen you this happy for at least 2 years." "Why wouldn't I be, Christopher?" said Felix. "Do come in. Let me take your coat." Chris sniffed the air. "You know, it smells quite strongly of ether in here. I could even smell it from outside." "Ether is the drug of kings," said Felix. "Unlike alcohol, which is a filthy drug, ether wears off rapidly and completely. I happen to rather like the smell. All the same, I can't help but think," Chris began, but Felix held up a hand to silence him. "The drug of kings," he said. "However, in honour of present company, I have allowed a bottle of Chianti Classico 2007 to warm to room temperature. I trust you'll have a little drink with me." "Felix, what is it you actually want to see me about?" said Chris. "A simple matter regarding the contract," said Felix. "But let us drink first. Also, I should like your advice on something I've been working on." Felix sat down in an enormous leather armchair and motioned Chris to sit on the sofa. Between them stood Felix's ether table, upon which stood 2 wine glasses. Felix pulled the cork out of a bottle of wine and carefully poured 2 glasses. "To us," said Felix, raising his glass. "Absolutely," said Chris, and they both sipped the wine. "Scrumptious," said Felix. "It's got quite a kick," said Chris, holding his glass up to the light. "Oh, I almost forgot. Let me get something," said Felix, and he went into his study to fetch the electric wheelchair. He wheeled it round to the sofa and placed it in front of Chris. "I've been working on this for a year now," he said. "It has cushions that adjust their angles electrically so as to be unusually comfortable. It induces a profound sense of rest and can also help one get into the bath or shower. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sitting in it for a while. I want your honest opinion on how it feels when one sits in it for half an hour or so." "Oh, of course," said Chris, "happy to help." He stood up and lowered himself into the wheelchair. "Feels very nice so far," he said. "Now to business," said Felix, handing Chris his glass of wine and drinking more of his own. "Incidentally," said Felix, "how do you find wine?" "Perhaps a little astringent," said Chris, "but not bad. How's yours?" "Quite sensational," said Felix. "Let's drink this up. We must finish the bottle before you leave." "I've got to drive home, mate," said Chris. "Maybe just half a glass for me." "Nonsense," said Felix. "I've saved this especially for you. By the time we finish speaking, it'll have worn off, I'm sure." "Felix," said Chris, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but there's an appalling smell in here. It's like ether and body odour and something else. Have you had a bath recently?" "I may have passed a few days without showering," said Felix, bristling. "I've been rather busy." "Well, never mind," said Chris, wrinkling his nose. "As long as you're okay. You seem in good spirits. So, you want to talk about the contract? See, I've been thinking about that. Currently, we have a 50-50 split, but I'd be prepared to go down to 40% so that you can have 60%. I've got more money now than I know what to do with, and, you know, although Sparrow Paint was my idea and I devised the marketing strategy, I couldn't have done it without a top-notch chemist like yourself. So if you want to quibble over percentages, really, I'm flexible on the matter. Amelia agrees with me too." "Oh," said Felix. "Really? This is awful "Magnanimous," said Chris.
"Yes,"
said Felix.
"awfully magnanimous."
"Are you okay, old boy?" said Chris, suddenly concerned. "You look a bit unsteady." Felix raised his wine glass in front of his eyes and peered at it.
"Did I muddle up the wine glasses?"
he said slowly. "Oh, I didn't know we had different wine glasses," said Chris. "I have a confession to make in that case. The wine tasted a bit funny to me, so while you were getting this wheelchair, I tried yours and that tasted alright. So I swapped the glasses just to see if you'd notice anything. But you didn't, so I must be imagining they're different. After all, you just poured both from the same bottle. I had no idea the glasses were different, but they don't look different." Chris took Felix's wine glass, which was now almost empty, and compared it carefully with his own, holding it up to the light. "Really, I can't see any difference at all," he said. Felix suddenly made a noise that suggested he may be about to vomit. "My God," said Chris, "it must be all that ether you've been drinking. You probably shouldn't mix your drinks. Let's get you to the bathroom." Chris sprang to his feet and began to place Felix's arm around his shoulder so as to lift him from his chair. Once in an upright position, Chris was struck by Felix's absolute inability to remain on his feet. "What the blazes has happened to you?" said Chris. "A glass of wine shouldn't have affected you this much." Felix tried to say something, but all that came out of his mouth were garbled mumbling sounds. "Tell you what, let's put you down here," said Chris, and he lowered Felix into the wheelchair. "You're surprisingly heavy, you know," he said, and he began to wheel the chair towards the bathroom. Felix began to make horrified gurgling sounds and tried to get out of the chair. "It's okay, just hold on for a minute and you can vomit into the toilet," said Chris, pulling him back into the chair. When they entered the dark bathroom, Chris tried to switch the light on. "Doesn't seem to work," he said. He switched it on and off 2 more times, Then suddenly there was a loud bang and Felix flew spectacularly from the chair and hit the bathroom wall above the bath, then fell into the bath. A huge bubbling and hissing rose from the bath and acrid fumes began to fill the bathroom. A pulley system attached to the electric chair began to reel in the seat cushion, which had landed near the bath but was still attached to the chair via 2 cables. "Felix!" shouted Chris in alarm, but a tiny drop of the piranha solution, now warm, spat out of the bath and landed on the sleeve of his shirt, which it quickly ate through, stinging his skin. Feeling there was clearly no chance of being able to save Felix, Chris ran to the kitchen and washed his arm under the tap. There was a small hole in his shirt where the liquid had landed on it, and a small patch of skin underneath appeared charred. "What is this?" said Chris to himself, incredulously. He went back to the door of the bathroom to see what was going on in there, but acrid fumes made him cough, and he could only see a brownish liquid bubbling and fuming vigorously in the bath. He ran from the house, stopping only to retrieve his jacket, which contained his car keys and a phone. Outside, he phoned emergency services. An ambulance was the first to arrive, followed by a fire engine and then the police. None of them were willing or able to enter the bathroom. The police sealed the street off and evacuated Felix's neighbours, telling them there had been some kind of toxic chemical incident. It was 4 hours before a fireman finally decided that the fumes had subsided to the point where it might be possible to enter Felix's house. When he arrived in the bathroom, wearing a full hazmat suit with breathing apparatus, he stood, gawping in amazement. The bath was now empty, and nothing stood out about the bathroom at all, except that there was an electric wheelchair standing next to the bath, and the entire bathroom seemed spotlessly clean. Thank you for listening. My name's John Purcell and you've been listening to Science Horror. All the stories on this channel are written by me. If you enjoyed this week's story, I hope you'll consider giving the video a like, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do consider subscribing. Thank you so much. I must admit, while writing this story, I had a bit of a worry that this might actually inspire someone to try to dissolve a body using piranha solution. Honestly, I think anyone who tries to do that is going to kill themselves, and they deserve it. Next week I have a story for you about a professor who's involved in biological warfare and ends up homeless after public opinion and his wife turn against him. Do join me again for that. That will be out hopefully around Monday if I finish writing it by then, which I probably will. And until next time, have a good week and sleep well.